Okay, so we've talked about some of the processing that's happening in the eye before a visual signal even leaves the eyeball. Um, from that point, of course, the visual signal goes back to the occipital lobe, goes back to the primary visual cortex. Now, primary visual cortex is in some way doing the same kind of thing as the retina. It's almost like mapping the retinal image onto the brain tissue back there. And so it's encoding things like, patterns of light, where in our visual world they're associated with. Of course, we've had edges accentuated, color differences accentuated, but to some extent, the primary visual cortex is really just kind of another one of these screens, as it were, another place in which the world is projected. And the next problem that the visual system has, and in fact, this is echoed across all our sensory systems, of course, is figuring out what it is that's out there. And that's what we're going to talk about in the next couple lectures. Okay. So, week 3, lecture 3, perceiving what? What do you see when you look down here, by the way? This is what's called an ambiguous figure. When you look at it, you maybe see a face, you maybe see a guy playing saxophone. If you look at it long enough, you can probably see both. Okay, the important point of this is that sensation and perception are different, that what we perceive can change even when the sensory input stays the same. Let me give you a couple of more examples. These are sort of famous, what are sometimes called ambiguous figures. I'll do this one really quickly. This is called the young lady, old hag ambiguous image sometimes. Depending on how you look at this image, you should be able to see one of two things. Let's do the young lady first. The young lady we're kind of seeing from behind, from over her left shoulder. So this would be her left shoulder. And let me just do it this way. This is her hair. Here's her forehead, her eye socket. We don't really see much of her eye. Her nose coming out here. And then this is like her cheek area, her chin, and her jawline coming back to her hair. This is like a necklace of some sort, and this is just her neck, going into her dress. So hopefully you can see that. Now let me see if I can let you see the old hag. For the old hag, the big thing is this is her eye. This is a great big honking nose. So once you see that great big honking nose, I don't know what this is, some sort of wart on her nose, but a great big honking nose, and this is actually her mouth. So a thin mouth with her cheek here and a few more wrinkles. Etc. And her chin is kind of tucked right in to this clothing, this dress, I guess. So hopefully you can see both of those things. And again, kind of notice how you can kind of see one for a little bit, and then you can kind of see the other one for a little bit. And sometimes you can sort of feel like you can see both. But this one's even more dramatic. Now, it's going to be really hard for me to guide you through this one. What you really got to do is just stare right around here. In fact, if you look at these three corners here, these ones tend to contain the most information, or at least this is where the most dramatic things happen. So this corner, for example, sometimes will seem very close to you, while those ones will seem relatively further away. But when it flips, the opposite will happen. So really, what I'd suggest you do is just stare around here and blink every now and then. And what you might see at some point is that the whole three-dimensional image you're looking at seems to change before your eyes. It almost seems to flip around this way, flip around this way. This is something called the Necker cube. You can find other examples of it online. And again, I can't guide you through it so well, but keep looking at it, keep trying it, and it'll flip. Really cool. All right, so the point again here is there's the sensory input, but then there's what we perceive, and there's something interesting that happens between those two. What is that? Well, a lot of psychologists have been trying to get to the bottom of that. It's a very complex problem of how we're able to perceive objects in the world. Here are some of the big issues people have talked about. The first one is, really the first part of this problem is figuring out, of all this visual input, where do the objects begin and end? And this is sometimes called separating figure from ground, where figure is like the object and ground is like the background. How do we know what are the objects? that's sort of the first problem. Once we know, where, that's an object, that's an object, that's an object, then we can start to ask, okay, what is that object? What is that object? But first we have to know which clumps of light are the objects. And so one notion is, well, edges are very important. In fact, that's why we think the bipolar cells are accentuating those edges and accentuating color distinctions. If you have a color distinction, that seems to produce an edge of a sort that defines an object relative to a ground. If that edge is accentuated, as it was in this bottom one, then even more so we get the impression that this is an object against a background. So it seems like right at the retina already some of this is going on. And the purpose of accentuating those edges is probably to help us detect the objects. Okay. Now this can be really difficult, but what I want to make a point here is it's not all about the eyeball. It's also about memory and previous experience. So hopefully some of you are looking at this and just seeing a whole bunch of black and white and not seeing any object at all. You're in a state of ignorance, and I use that term nicely, a state of ignorance that I'm going to take away from you. And once I take it away from you, you won't have it back. So enjoy for a little bit. If you're looking around and just seeing black and white, enjoy that, because I'm about to rob you of it, which is kind of the point. I am going to show you the object in this image, and once you see it, I want you to kind of feel what changes in your mind. Feel like, whoa, okay, it's emerged. All right, so let me just do it. What we have here is a Dalmatian, and I'm going to generally outline the Dalmatian. It's over here, sniffing the ground, and I assume it's like a leafy forest or something like that. So the Dalmatian obviously is black and white spotted, and then let me try to really help you out here. This is his head, his snout, and he's down sniffing the ground. So his nose is somewhere around here. This is like his jaw and his nose. This is like his ear dangling down. Think of this as a collar, if it helps you out. It's probably more like a shadow on his shoulder blade, but you could think of it as a collar. So once you see the head, then you probably see the foreleg here, his left foreleg. Then you can kind of see the stomach and chest. Things get really kind of ambiguous back here. The back end is harder to see. Maybe a tail up here, but once you get over here, now you get the back and the shoulder coming down the neck and back to the head. Okay, so if you look at that a bit, you should be able to detect that. Now this is the cool thing. I'm going to show it to you in a little while again, and you will just see it. Like if you can see it here, fight with it here until you can see it. And then once you do see it, you will always be able to see it forever and ever, which is kind of an interesting point, but it's showing the role that memory is playing in terms of helping interpret the raw sensory experience, ultimately producing a perception. Okay, so figure ground, one thing. Now, another thing is, well, okay, figure ground's perfectly fine, but if you look at somebody, like even if you look at me, you see that there are edges, there are distinctions happening here, but this is all part of the same thing. So there's, the world is never easy on us. It really isn't. And so the visual system has to figure out, okay, what goes with what? And that's a problem that's called grouping sometimes. How do I figure out what parts of that visual scene go with what other parts of that visual scene? And that whole area is an area called Gestalt psychology, or at least Gestalt psychology really pushed this grouping thing. Again, this was kind of a post-Freud reaction, kind of running back to perception, because perception felt like something that we were getting at very scientifically. So a lot of researchers said, let's go back there. That's a really kind of good scientific place to start. And so they were really worried about this grouping issue, and they found all these things they call laws, Gestalt laws of grouping. Some of them are pretty simple, but still important. So for example, proximity. The idea here is this is really 16 circles, but we will tend to see this as 4 vertical groupings of 4 circles each. That is, each of these 4 feel like they group together. Why? Because they're closer to each other than they are to their next neighbor on the horizontal dimension. So they just group because they're close. Things that are close together tend to group. This is a different example. In this case, we tend to see more horizontal bars. Why? Because these things are more similar to each other. So they're grouping together because they're similar looking. Okay, similarity can group things. Continuity. Well, let's call these four lines. But if I said these are 4 lines, but I said you can group 2 together and group another 2 together, most of us would say, well, this goes with this, and this goes with this. But it needn't, right? We could think of this as like an arrowhead pointing down to the right, and another arrowhead pointing up to the left. That would be a perfectly reasonable interpretation of it, but we don't want to see it that way usually. Our system likes things to continue on, something we call good continuation. And so that makes us want to see this as being part of this, and this as being part of this. Okay, these are pretty basic things, but this is what underlies a lot of our basic perceptual abilities. Closure as well. We call this closure, but I like the notion of simplicity too. Simplicity kind of gets into this. So how do we see this? Well, we could literally see it as 3 Pac-Men, because they are kind of like Pac-Man-like figures. You know, it's little circles with mouths facing each other in just the right way. That's what's out there, but we tend to see this as 3 complete circles with a triangle sitting on top of them. Now that triangle's not there. Those lines that you might feel like you see here are what we call illusory contours. There is no triangle there. But our perceptual system likes a really simple interpretation of things. And by simple, we mean sometimes similar to things we've experienced before. And so we've experienced a lot of circles. There's a lot of circles in the world. There's not a lot of Pac-Man in the world unless you play Pac-Man every day. And so 3 circles with a triangle is simple. If anything's bounded by something else, we tend to see that bounded thing as all being part of the same thing. Nothing profound. Nothing profound. Wow. Yeah, profound. Sure. I thought I had said profane, but I didn't. I said profound. Yeah, we'll leave it. Symmetry. Let's do the symmetry one. This is another case where we could view this as a rectangle with a little bite out of it. And this also being a rectangle with a little bite out of it. So 2 of these rectangles with bites out of it touching up against each other. But again, we don't. We like simple things, in this case 2 overlapping squares, and we seem to like symmetry. That's the other reason we don't seem to like this. Our visual system seems to prefer things be relatively symmetrical, and that's the interpretation it will draw given the chance. So all of these things can come together to produce, you know, these kind of things where we have good continuation, suggesting that these lines are continuing but are just being occluded by this square that doesn't even exist. So we can get these fancy illusions because of the way our system wants to group this. It wants to see 4 black circles, a square in the back, and a white square on top. That's a nice, straightforward, simple way of seeing this that fits with the kinds of things we see in the world. Okay. Let me show you one other Gestalt principle, because I think this one's critical, and I think it really makes the point in the way some of the others don't. I mentioned that my shirt has these different colors. Why don't you see these as designating separate parts of different objects? Well, in the real world, things aren't static. Things tend to move, and movement provides a very important cue. So let me go back to, I don't know if you had the same fascination as I did when I was a kid, but I was always fascinated by nature kind of movies, and so you'd have something like this. So you see here, what we have is a frog hidden in the leaves, and the frog is so carefully camouflaged that you cannot see the frog in the leaves. It all blends together. But wait, the frog will move in just a sec, and as soon as it moves, you see it. Okay, so what do we have going here? Well, these 4 circles are said to be suffering. Suffering is a strange word, but a common fate. They are moving together through time. And when that happens, that seems to suggest, or it certainly suggests to our visual system, that all goes together somehow. That's all part of a single object that's moving. Okay, and that's largely why we can have one color pants and a different shirt and all kinds of crazy colors on us, but as soon as we move down the hallway, we're perceived as a single human being. All these various, mixed matched features of us get glued together into a single object. So common fate's a very powerful one in the real world. For anything that moves, think of cars, think of people, think of bikes and motorcycles and etc. We very quickly perceive those as single objects. In fact, if you think of a motorcycle with a rider on it, we kind of see that as a single object, even though it is a rider and a motorcycle, but because they're moving together, they become almost a single object. Okay, so again, that's a critical first step, figuring out the object. I want to highlight the role that memory is playing in this early step and the way it can play a general role. We're going to really focus on memory when we start talking about recognizing what objects are, but even in this very general early perceptual stage, memory plays a role. So for example, context, the context in which an item occurs, and we're going to really focus on this middle item. This is the exact same slide duplicated. All I've done is put these little boxes either over the A and C here, or over the 12 and 14 here. But otherwise, these are the exact same. And the point is, if this is all you saw, then this middle object would look a lot like a 13. And if this is all you saw, then this middle object would look a lot like a B, even though it's the exact same sensory stimulus. So the point here is that every time we come into any context, so if we're in a hospital, we expect hospital kinds of sights, hospital kinds of sounds. If we're in a university, we expect university sights, university sounds. If we're in a park, we expect park sights, park sounds. So our system walks into these situations primed. It's ready to experience certain things that are high probability in that environment. And so those concepts in memory are heightened a little bit, and if we get a little bit of stimuli from the world that suggests that that's there, a squirrel in a park, for example, that's a real important part of how we perceive this ambiguous kind of information. Okay, we're really going to ratchet up the memory influence in the next lecture. I just wanted to bring it in here and actually hit you over the head again with it here. Here's our friend the Dalmatian again, and I expect he just popped out for you now, and will forevermore. By the way, I could show you this 5 years from now, and you would still see the Dalmatian. Creepy, but true. All right, so here's just a few other things for you to follow. Here's a video on sensation and perception, just to make a lot of that stuff I've been talking about a little clearer for you. This is kind of a funny short YouTube video of these two kind of puppets that talk in funny German voices, German accents I should say, but talking about Gestalt principles. So I found it humorous and informative, so I thought it was pretty good. This is a deeper video about perception and how we interpret the world around us. So this one's kind of cool, a little bit longer, a little bit more ominous, but cool. And then just a couple things for you to check out. How Gestalt principles are used in design, and just another website that kind of walks you through some of these Gestalt principles so you get a sense of those. Okay, so I'm going to leave it there for now, but we're going to take right over. We've now figured out sort of where an object begins and where it ends, and so the next problem that we're going to face is, well, how do you know what that object is? We'll talk about that next. I hope you have a great day.